Hello everyone, and welcome to another video in the AWS database series. Here, we discuss AWS cloud databases, their cool new features, and see how you can implement these features in your own environment. My name is Aditya Samant. I'm a solutions architect specializing in database technologies here at AWS. So one such database and a feature we're going to talk about today is RDS MySQL and authentication, specifically authenticating using Kerberos and Active Directory. We will do a quick review of this feature and then spend most of the time doing an actual demo. So let's dive in. Okay, so let's quickly review our agenda for today. We will go over what is authentication. We will do a quick review of Kerberos authentication for RDS MySQL. Then we will review the demo steps, and then we will get into the actual demo. So what is authentication? Authentication, put simply, is the process of recognizing a user's identity. This is where the database server is validating the incoming user. Usually, this is achieved by providing a username and a password during the initial connection to the server. You can authenticate to RDS MySQL via local username and passwords, or AWS IAM, or Kerberos. Authentication is not same as authorization though, where the authenticated user is given additional privileges on the database objects beyond the ability to simply connect to the server. For the scope of this video, we will only discuss the process of authentication and see how we can authenticate to an RDS MySQL server using Kerberos and managed Microsoft Active Directory. To enable Kerberos authentication with RDS MySQL, we have to use AWS Directory Services for Microsoft Active Directory, also referred to as AWS Managed Microsoft AD. For this to work, you have to first join the RDS MySQL DB instance to an AWS Managed Active Directory domain. When a user authenticates with MySQL DB instance joined to the trusting domain, authentication requests are forwarded. Forwarded requests go to the domain directory that you create with AWS Directory Service. The advantage of using Kerberos authentication is that keeping all of your credentials in the same directory saves you time and effort. You also have a centralized place for storing and managing credentials for multiple DB instances. You also get better control over password complexity, expiration, and rotation. The centralized user management approach also improves your overall security posture. So let's review the demo steps real quick. We will start by creating a managed Microsoft Active Directory. Then we will create a new AD user, which we will use later to log on to the RDS MySQL instance. Next, we will create a new RDS MySQL instance and add it to the domain we created in the first step. We will connect to the MySQL instance using a local user and create an external user corresponding to the Active Directory user that we created in the previous steps. And finally, we will log in to the Active Directory user and validate. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to head over to our AWS Management Console, and then we're going to go to the Directory Services. In the Directory Services, we are going to create a new Microsoft Active Directory, which is our managed Active Directory. So I'm going to click on Setup Directory. We will select AWS Managed Microsoft AD. Then we'll select the Standard Edition. We'll provide a DNS name for our Active Directory. I will use rdstest.com. The name here doesn't matter. And then I'm going to take all the other defaults and provide a password. And then click on Next. I am going to let the VPC to be default. Just make sure that the VPC that you're going to select is the same VPC where you would also create the RDS database instance. I will leave everything else to defaults like subnets, etc. and then click on Next. Let's review the information, make sure everything is correct. and let's click on create directory. So this is going to go ahead and take a few minutes. You see the status is creating right now, and then eventually it will finish creating, and then we can go to our next step, which is to create a new user. Okay, so a few minutes have passed, and as you can see, the Active Directory rdstest.com is now active. So if we click on that, you would see that you can see the VPC details, the subnet details, and all that kind of good stuff. So the next thing that we have to do is create a user. Now to do that, we're going to head over to an EC2 instance, a Windows EC2 instance, and then we are going to create a user here. Now the thing that you have to keep in mind that this EC2 instance has to be added to the Active Directory domain that we just created, which is the rdstest.com domain. So let's take a look and make sure that this computer is actually added to that domain. So I'll look at the properties, and if you see under the domain here, you can see that this EC2 instance is joined to rdstest.com. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead to the Active Directory users and computers. And then under the rdstest.com domain, we are going to come down here to the users, and then we're going to add a user here. You can see that there's already an admin user that was created by the AWS Managed Active Directory itself. So we use this admin user to log on to this computer, but we're going to create a new user that we'll use to log on to RDS MySQL. Now this user will, in real world scenario, these users will be created for you by your Active Directory administrator. But we're just going to walk through these scenarios so you kind of see some of these steps that are involved to create the user. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new user. I'm just going to call it RDS user. And then I'm going to provide a password. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on next and finish. Okay, so now the RDS user is created. So the next step is to create the corresponding user in the RDS MySQL instance. Well, to do that, we have to create the RDS MySQL instance first. So let's head over to the console and do just that. Okay, so we are in the AWS RDS console. We're going to go ahead and create a RDS MySQL instance. So we're going to select RDS MySQL here. And for the version, we are going to select one of the supported versions for Kerberos Authentication. So these versions are 8.0.13, 15, and 16, or 5.7.24, 25, or 26. So I'm just going to go ahead and select 8.0.16 here. Most of the information here, I'm just going to leave it at their defaults. So let me just select a database identifier, RDS AD demo. I'm going to leave the master username as admin, and let's just select a password. Make sure the passwords match. I won't change almost any of these other details here. Let's leave the VPC to default, subnet groups to default, the security group as well to default. And then, of course, the most important thing is that we select password and Kerberos authentication. Now, when you select that, you would see that it asks you to browse a directory. This is where we get to join this RDS MySQL instance to the domain that we just created. So let's go ahead and click on Browse Directory. And obviously, the only directory we have available is the one that we created. So click on that and then click on Choose. I'm going to create a database name, test AD demo 1. Leave everything else at the defaults, and then go all the way to the bottom, and then click on Create Database. So again, this is going to take a few minutes, and then this database is going to become available to us. Okay, so several minutes have now passed, and we can see that the RDS MySQL instance is showing status as available. And under Connectivity and Security, we can see that the directory status is Kerberos enabled, and this database instance is now added to the rdstest.com Active Directory domain that we created in the last step. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a note of this RDS instance endpoint, and we're going to go ahead and connect to this database instance. Now, when we are connecting to this database instance, we are using the admin user and the password that we created when we created this instance first. This step is not using the Kerberos authentication. This is just using local authentication. And during this step, we are going to actually create the user that corresponds to the AD user we created before. The client we are using here is MariaDB, which is according to the documentation. So now we're in the database instance. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to create the RDS user, which is the AD user that we created in the previous step. So the syntax is simple: create user, and then the name of the user, which is RDS user, and then it is an external user, so we are saying identified with authpam, which is using that external authentication plugin. Now you would notice here that I'm not providing any password because we are using the password that we created during the Active Directory user creation step. Okay, the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to flush the privileges, and we're going to exit out of here. Now, one other step that is highly recommended when you use Active Directory authentication with MySQL is that you use SSL, or you encrypt your connections. This is because if you don't use SSL, the password can be seen in a plain text format. So we highly recommend that you use SSL during your production usage of Kerberos authentication with RDS MySQL. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit an up arrow. And now this time, instead of using the admin, which was the local user, let's use RDS user, which is the Active Directory user, and then go ahead and provide the password. And that's it, we are in. So this demonstration showed you the end-to-end process that you have to follow to create the Active Directory and then add the user, creating the RDS database instance, adding the corresponding user to that instance, and then finally connecting with the Kerberos authentication using that AD user. Thank you so much for taking the time and going through this video. I hope this was helpful and you'll be able to apply what you learned here today to your own environments. Enjoy the rest of your day, and as always, happy cloud computing from everyone here at AWS.